I am going to call this budget retreat to order and introduce our esteemed county administrator, who is going to be presenting us with all the information we need to set a target for our tax levy for 2023 and enable her to move forward with her team to create a budget proposal for us to consider in the fall. So Lisa, take it away.
Thanks, Deborah. Welcome everyone to the 2023 budget retreat. It's like an annual holiday in county administration. We're excited about it. Glad to be here. And I'm going to start sharing my screen so that folks can see the presentation. Okay. Looks like everyone can see it. Mic a little closer. Can. Okay. Is that better? Sure. Okay. So welcome again, everyone. This is a time-honored tradition for the county administrator to share relevant factors and the best data that we have to date to inform the 2023 budget preparation. I have just over 50 slides to share with you tonight. I'm going to go at a pretty rapid clip. It's going to be thorough, but quick. I want to start off by thanking Samantha Freilich, our budget analyst in county administration, who's behind me, whose hard work and number crunching helped to shape this presentation. And let's see, again. Not sure why it's not advancing. There we go. So the overview is going to begin with the larger economic and fiscal indicators under which we're operating and the many forces which shape the county budget. I'm going to start with the overall average unemployment rates, the annual unemployment rates. After reaching highs in 2020 after COVID, unemployment came down last year. And as is often the case, Tompkins County's unemployment rate was lower than the Southern Tier region and the rest of New York State. And as you can see here, unemployment rates have declined overall in the last year. And as of February 2022, Tompkins County's unemployment rate was 3%, which is the lowest in the state. There's a great demand for workers to fill open positions across just about every industry, spanning entry-level, mid-level, and high-level positions. And we're certainly seeing the impact here at the county as an employer in our attempts to fill positions across the organization. And we're also starting to see the impact of our nation's demographics play out as members of the baby boom generation retire, and many have made those decisions to retire during the pandemic. And the size of the generations that follow, Generation X, Y, the millennials, just aren't there in the numbers to take their place. Hence, there's a lot of demand for workers and a short supply. It's another look at the unemployment data. The Department of Labor unemployment data are not seasonally adjusted, which means they reflect seasonal influences like holiday and summer hires. So the most valid comparison of this data are year-to-year comparisons over the same month. So for example, February 21 versus February 22. So you can really clearly see here where we were in February 21 in Tompkins County unemployment, we were 4.8%. Now we're at 3.0% this year. Next is inflation, and inflation, as we all know here, inflation in the US is at a 40-year high. We reached 8.5% in March. This really means that the cost of goods and services has continued to increase and consumer purchasing power has decreased. This hurts people who are on fixed incomes the most. And inflation has a multi-layered impact on county budgets. Many supply chains continue to be constrained. There's a lag for ordering building materials and automobiles. And as we'll see later in the presentation, I'm seeing an impact on our capital projects, as well as our departments like highway that use a lot of fuel for vehicles. Conversely, as inflation rates drive up the price of fuel, we'll see larger sales tax revenues, which is a major source of income for the county. But then finally, prolonged periods of inflation can lead to recession and an increase in the need for supportive services offered by the county. So the signs are that we're not there yet in terms of a recession, but some prognosticators worry that a recession may be coming. Others say that inflation has peaked and it will soon be on its way down. So we're really in a period of uncertainty as to where this is going. I also, back on the inflation, the Federal Reserve increased interest rates by 1/4 percentage point in March to increase the cost of borrowing and try to start dampening the demand. And the rate hikes are expected at each of the Fed's remaining meetings in 2022, with a 1/2 percentage point rate hike expected in May. So the increase in inflation is also going to impact the tax cap calculation, which we'll see later on in these slides. But on to consumer confidence. It's an economic indicator measuring the degree of optimism consumers feel about the overall state of the economy and their personal financial situation. And when consumer confidence is high, consumers make more purchases. And when consumer confidence is low, consumers tend to save more and spend less. And you can see in this graph, confidence is volatile right now. We're seeing current levels below where we were seeing during the pandemic. This is due again in part to the sustained inflation we've been seeing. The cost of gasoline hits many Americans' pocketbooks directly, and the 8-week-old Russian invasion in Ukraine is also adding to people's feelings of uncertainty. Gas prices have seen a 40% increase since January of 2021. Looking at the stock market.
Sorry, Lisa, did you say 40%?
40%.
Thank you.
The Dow Jones serves as a bellwether for the overall U.S. stock market and includes America's largest companies across a range of industry. And the stock market has been performing relatively well overall since the pandemic-related shutdowns of 2020. Now we're shifting to look at the more local indicators of need, starting with the number of households in Tompkins County on the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program or food stamp program. SNAP is a very important national program to address food insecurity, and the number of SNAP participants tend to rise during economic downturns and fall as economic recovery reaches lower income households. So it's a very responsive program to assist families during economic downturns. And we can see in Tompkins County over the last 10 years that SNAP caseloads have declined overall, though they are up 4% from January 21 to 22. As the pandemic continued on in 2021, we saw an uptick in individuals on SNAP, and you can see the 2021 numbers they're the red bars here. September 21 marked the end of expanded unemployment benefits, and SNAP numbers have seemed to be on the rise since then. By the way, I should mention, I'll be sending everyone copies of this PowerPoint when we're done, so you have it for reference. Another indicator of need, Tompkins County's number of people on temporary assistance to needy families, or TANF, continues to decline. And TANF is a federal block grant that's passed down through states to localities that provides cash assistance to families. And TANF comes with a limited lifetime benefit of 5 years. So there is no county share that goes to paying for the TANF program. It comes from that federal block grant. But we've been seeing these numbers decline. But once a family or an individual reaches the 5-year limit and is no longer eligible for TANF, they are eligible for safety net assistance. And with safety net, there isn't a lifetime limit and there's a local share involved. So 71% of the safety net expenses are borne by the county, 29% are picked up by New York State. So in Tompkins County, we've also been seeing an overall decline in safety net cases. And notably though, during the pandemic, these cases continued to decline, I think in large part because there were many other federal and state supports that came into play, such as expanded unemployment, stimulus monies to households, and the eviction moratorium. So now that those are phasing out, we may be seeing these numbers back on the rise. But
what questions as we go along, or wait till the end?
I think if we could wait to the end, but if there are clarifying questions, I'd be happy to. Okay. This slide here is a comparison, a side-by-side comparison of our TANF and safety net numbers, which are both on a decline. Take a little water break here. And we'll move on to other fiscal drivers that impact our budget. So after property taxes, sales taxes are the largest source of revenue for counties. And Tompkins County's average sales tax growth has been strong. It's been 3.4% over the last 10 years. The two major outliers in that time were, of course, in 2020, when our local economy essentially shut down, colleges shut down due to the pandemic, which was unprecedented. And our county was the county in New York State that was most affected. Our sales tax numbers were declined the most statewide during the pandemic. But then that was followed by a rebound last year in which our sales taxes rebounded by 23.8%, which was our best year on record. So excluding those two outlying years, our 10-year average annual growth in sales tax was 2.9%, which is again very strong. Here's a visual representation of what I just said, looking at the last 4 years of sales tax revenues. So you can see in the center, the light blue and the yellow lines where we were in 2018 and 2019, followed by the pandemic year 2020 in green, which you can see the dramatic hit, followed by the dramatic recovery in 2021, which is the dark blue line over the top. Then you can see superimposed in red, the very short line. Those are the first 3 months of sales tax receipts for 2022, which have come in even higher in the first quarter than all of these previous years. So sales tax is very strong right now. And at the same time, it is an elastic revenue source and notoriously pretty difficult to predict. But this is what we've been seeing historically. Something else related to sales tax that's quite significant and a positive outcome from the New York State budget is that the state ended the diversion of county sales taxes for state purposes. This amounted to nearly $700,000 total annually that had been diverted, that were county sales taxes that were usurped by the state for the Distressed Hospital Fund and aid to municipalities. So in 2023, these revenues will be coming back to the county, and we'll be factoring these in our 2023 revenue projections. Next, I want to talk about some of the threats and opportunities that we see on the horizon for 2023. Starting with some unknowns in mandates, and starting with assigned council 18B funding. So this is the funding that our assigned council receives for to pay attorneys. Right now, those rates are $75 an hour that we pay for our representation. The federal rates are double that. They're $158 an hour. And there is a pending court case in Manhattan where legal organizations are suing the state and New York City to raise the rates for representation. If they're raised, there's a fear that it could be an unfunded mandate for counties because despite this court case being pending, the state did not allocate resources to cover such an increase. So in Tompkins County, it could be a $1.8 million increase. And this court case is pending right now, and in the next few weeks, we may be hearing more about it. Also in the state budget, there's a mandate that counties now must pay 100% of the federal rates for foster care host families, and many counties will be impacted by this. We are already in Tompkins County paying 100% of those federal rates, which is good, but there could be additional changes in the formula which affect our bottom line, and we don't yet know the extent of this. And then finally, the federal Fmap reconciliations for Medicaid. This is the Federal Medical Assistance Percentage, or Fmap. So New York State reimbursements to counties for their calculated share of federal dollars due to us under the Affordable Care Act. We have not yet received the funding due to us from 2016 to present. And there's still no indication or timeline when New York State will be reimbursing counties on this federal funding that is owed to us. The money could be coming in Medicaid credits to us by decreasing our weekly share payments. And we know from a FOIL request that was submitted by my predecessor, Jason Molino, that Tompkins County is owed $3.5 million for the time period between 2016 and 2020. And we expect another $1 to $2 million will be owed to us for since that time. So whenever we receive this funding, it will hit our bottom line as a surplus, but there is no telling when that may happen. I'm going to take another drink here. This is a section here to talk about the airport. This is a major note of caution for the legislature to be aware of. And this is affecting the global and the national airline industry across the boards. Took a huge hit with the pandemic, and our local airport is no exception. Enplanements are down at the Ithaca Airport. In 2020, they were 30% of where they were in 2019. In 2021, they recovered to 50%. So the passenger facilities charges, or PFCs, that the airport receives for every eligible passenger using the airport are tied directly to the number of enplanements. So as enplanements have decreased, our PFC revenues have also decreased. We had expected and budgeted that our PFC revenues would pay for a portion of the debt service on the airport terminal project. The debt service for that project begins in 2023, and this is one area where we know that additional local funding may be necessary to get the airport through this period of time until air service recovers. Additionally, the hit to air service also is going to impact the airport's operating budget. Over the last 2 years, the airport has received federal funding to support it through the CARES Act, through CARISA and ARPA, all of which end in 2022. These funds have been used to help lower terminal fees to incentivize the airlines to continue service, to keep enplanements going, and to keep ticket prices reasonable. And without this aid, we run the risk of increasing terminal fees, increasing prices, and making the airport less competitive, which would result in fewer passengers, fewer flights, a decrease in apron fees, and decrease in PFC revenues. So it's not a good situation. It puts the county in a very challenging situation with our airport. And we should expect to see the need for support in the 2023 budget, not only with their capital debt service, but very likely a need for infusion of one-time funds for assistance. And we may likely be seeing these needs arise in 2022 as well. So I just wanted to make folks aware.
Sorry, Lisa, did you mean also in 2023? You said also in 2022?
Also in the current year.
Oh,
So both in,
year?
as we're preparing for the 2023 budget, but I wouldn't be surprised if in the current year, 2022, there may be some need for continued assistance.
Just to clarify that the debt payment starts in 2023?
The debt payment starts in 2023, yes. So here's a visual of the emplanements over the last 10 years or so at the Ithaca Airport. And you can see the direct link to the PFC revenues generated. This is really the kind of the bad news portion of our presentation tonight, but it's very important for everyone to be made aware of this situation with the airport, so we're prepared for the potential ramifications and that we can plan for them accordingly. Moving on to some other considerations for 2023. The organizations who support local tourism are typically funded through room tax revenues, and typically they don't receive funding through the county property tax levy. In 2021, after room tax revenue took a severe hit due to the pandemic shutdown, the county allocated about $573,000 out of the contingency fund to assist the tourism program. And then in the 2022 budget, the county allocated $655,000 in ARPA funding to tourism to restore lost funding and to keep the program at pre-COVID levels. In 2023, we expect the program to be once again fully sustained through the room tax revenue. So no further impact on the levy. In other areas, we expect in 2023 to increase the solid waste fee by $5 to support our recycling and materials management department. And that plan has been in the works some time. And then in other areas, we are in the process of consulting on an organization-wide compensation study this year, market analysis, and we should have the results by the end of this year, and any necessary salary adjustments would be factored in over time. It's going to take a concerted plan of how to accomplish that, and will also involve working through our collective bargaining agreements and with our unions. And then finally, on other considerations, where we stand with the county's ARPA funding. We were allocated a total of $19.8 million in ARPA funding. We committed $14.9 million, or about 75% of that, toward capital projects, leaving the remainder to be committed to other one-time needs. And again, this is one-time funding, and we're allocating it to one-time needs. Last year, the legislature budgeted $3.65 million toward one-time over target requests, and that left another $1.29 million remaining. So I expect that the remaining funds will be used in the 2023 budget process and fully committed through that process. Some other assumptions. At this point in the process, we can do the initial calculations to estimate our 2023 property tax cap. And we estimate that to be at 3.49%, meaning we can increase the amount of taxes we levy by 3.49% or $1.83 million. And that's the maximum for the cap. The calculation is based on a number of factors per the state's tax cap formula. It includes an inflationary factor, which is limited to the lesser of 2% or the consumer price index. And we know the consumer price index is sky high, so we're using the 2% figure. It also includes the sales tax credit offsets to towns, the tax base growth factor over the last 6 years, pilot revenue, and a few other factors. So our estimate will change mid-year based on actual mid-year inflation figures, and when we receive the sales tax credit estimates mid-year. So, so this amount is subject to change, but this is where we think we're at right now. And the legislature usually passes a perfunctory resolution, which allows us to exceed the tax cap in the event that it's necessary due to financial hardship. But the only year I'm aware of in recent history where we needed to do that was 2020 in the during the height of COVID and reduction in sales tax revenues. So now we'll get into some of the major drivers that impact the budget. And these categories are similar that we look at on a year-to-year basis. These are the main components that make up the maintenance of effort budget for the county. We'll start with wages. In 2023, our wages will grow by about 5.5 million. This figure takes into account all of the negotiated salary increases with all of our bargaining units, and also the assumption that we will negotiate with corrections by the end of the year according to certain wage parameters. So the fact that we have agreements with pretty much all of our bargaining units is a very good thing for many reasons, not the least of which is that we know what to expect for salary costs in terms of budgeting. This figure also includes the monies that we expect to receive from the state for departments who can draw down state revenues for salary. So it nets those monies out to get the localized share of the wages, and it does not include fringe costs. Oops. I would love to, let me see. There we go. I had the number lock on. The wages, is that where you wanted? Okay.
Clarification again, that's the net to the county?
Correct. The net increase is 5.5 million. So where we were in 2022 was about 45 million, where we expect to be in 2023 is 50 million, 51 million. Sure. And that's net of fringes, which is the next slide. So the fringe amount that we're expecting for 2023 is surprisingly lower than one would expect, even on a higher payroll. And this is in part due to having more of our employees in tiers 5 and 6 in the state retirement system. Also, we're starting to see the impact of the changes in health insurance and the widespread movement to the Platinum Plan across the organization, as well as the Medicare Supplement Program for our eligible retirees. It also assumes a 7% increase in insurance rates through the Municipal Health Consortium, in which the county belongs. And it takes into account an estimated increase in pension charges from New York State that we became aware of through NISAC's budget analysis. So in all, we're expecting to see a decrease in $835,000 in fringe costs. And so in the context of this presentation in this section, anything that you see in parentheses that's a negative, that's actually a good thing because it indicates savings for the coming year. So parentheses are good. Negatives are positive. Okay, all right. The next slide, we're looking at allowance for negotiations, and in most years, this is money that we put aside for any amount that we would expect to pay if we didn't have contracts in place for any of our bargaining units. So here you can see in 2023, we're assuming that we're going to have contracts with all of our units. So we did not budget any money in this account. We budgeted instead in the salary and fringe lines. So I've made the assumption here that we are going to settle with corrections in 2022, and these estimates are included in the wages and fringes. If we don't settle, we would back that figure out and put it here in allowance for negotiations. So here's a recap of the assumptions that were just included in these calculations, which I just mentioned, that our salary increases will be consistent with the current collective bargaining agreements, that we'll have corrections in place consistent with wage parameters. We've made pension adjustments and health insurance premiums are up. And looking at our roster of current county employees, we have currently about 767 total employees. So you can't quite see the numbers on this, on the big screens here, but we have in 2022, 715 full-time employees and 52 part-time employees. So in the 2022 budget, we were able to restore some of the positions that we weren't able to fund in 2021 due to the pandemic-related roster reductions. So, of course, our employee roster, the fringe and salary costs are directly related to tie into our rostered employees. So back to the other components which drive the budget. Here I'm recommending an increased capital contribution for 2023 based on some of the factors and the threats I mentioned previously. This would be equivalent to about $1 million roughly, or 1.93%. It takes into consideration that by policy, we increase the capital contribution by 0.5% annually to support our infrastructure investments. So that is already baked in there. It also includes another 0.5% increase in 2023 to account for a projected increase in the cost of materials due to inflation. And I think that that is realistic to assume that we will see that. And it includes an increase that amounts to about $480,000 or a 0.93% increase to cover a portion of the debt service for the airport terminal. Again, relating to the reduction in expected PFC revenue and other airport related revenues. And again, these increases are hoped to be temporary in nature, but responding to the needs that we see before us. Also, the contingency fund, I'm recommending an increase in the contingency fund for 2023. This is the fund that we keep for unforeseen expenses or opportunities. It's the fund out of which any terminal pay is taken for employees across all departments. So when employees leave the organization and are due a payout of their fringe time, it's paid out of contingency fund rather than the individual departmental budgets. In 2021, we were severely under budgeted in contingency, and the finance director had to make a mid-year request to replenish it from the general fund. So this would put it a little more in line. And since 2023 it will be, we expect a transitional year with departmental rollover, I thought it was wise to add some funding in the contingent fund for potential expenses there. The town plowing involves our contracts with other municipalities for plowing 150 miles of county roads. Our expenses in the 2021-22 plowing season were lower than what was budgeted. However, with the increase in fuel costs, we kept these amounts the same as we budgeted for last year. So no change there.
You're saying that the expenses are going to be higher for fuel prices in 2023, but you're going to leave the same amount in 20.
They didn't use the whole amount.
We didn't use that full amount in 2022. Yeah. So we're keeping it. Yeah, sure. The equipment and renewal and replacement at the Department of Emergency Response. This has been a year-over-year gradual build up or build back of $50,000 per year in the target budget for DEWR. In years past, the New York State Equipment Renewal and Replacement Grant was being utilized to subsidize salaries in that department. And a few years ago, that grant was separated out from the operating budget in order to designate that grant funding for needed equipment maintenance, and as having functional equipment is mission critical to that department. So this annual $50,000 increase has been an attempt to get the operating budget up to the level it needs to be to support staff salaries, while also using that grant funding to maintain critical equipment. The self-insurance reserve, I'm recommending here that we add another 100,000 to our self-insurance reserve. This is the reserve account which covers judgments and claims against the county, auto accidents, slips, trips, and falls, any lawsuits or arbitrations. I looked at trend data, and over the past few years, about $400,000 per year in expenses is consistent with our claims experience and what we've been seeing. So this would put us more in line with our actual experience. The mandate section of the county budget is often a tricky area. Mandated costs are by definition what you'd expect them to be. If an expense comes in, the county is mandated to pay for it. The county's mandated costs include many programs through the Department of Social Services, Medicaid, family assistance, safety net, childcare, daycare, and costs for court-involved minors. In the health department, the preschool special education program, early intervention, and the medical examiner program are all mandated. Then we have the attorney fees for assigned counsel program, in which there's the pending court case. We are also charged for Tompkins County students who attend community colleges elsewhere in New York State. It's called the college chargebacks. And then there are mental health mandates for Tompkins County residents who are facing trial for any crime and deemed unfit to stand trial. We have to pay their hospital costs while they're on trial, which can last for several months. And these aren't high numbers. They don't happen very often, but when it happens, it can be very costly to the county. And finally, we're responsible for paying for medical care for people in our jail, as well as board out costs. The board out costs have decreased over time, but they are still present due to primarily to the structure of our jail facility and limitations when we have to house females. So often to maintain that separation, we have to board out to other counties. So after consultation with all of these departments, it appears that our mandate costs on the whole may decrease slightly in 2023. What looked like a decrease in expected mandated costs for DSS was subsumed by an almost identical increase in costs for the health department. The pending court case with assigned counsel is still a $1.8 million unknown, and unknown as to how the state is going to handle it. And I think far too big and unknown for us to include in our budget estimates at this stage.
Wait, so just to be clear, those numbers did not include an additional 1.8 million?
That's correct.
Thanks.
Yep. Now, the sales tax prediction is a very important factor on the revenue side of the county budget. And based on the previous slides I showed you, sales tax was very strong in 2021 and into 2022. And additionally, we know that because New York State will no longer be diverting nearly $700,000 of our local sales taxes in 2023, we can consider that money our local funding again. However, I would say given the global uncertainties with the war in Ukraine, the continuing COVID variants, and the high inflation and decreasing consumer confidence, threats of recession, I think it's important that we proceed cautiously at this point. I've based the 2023 estimate of sales tax on the 2021 actual revenues and added back in the funding that was previously diverted by New York State. So I'm not looking at I have not included the estimates for current year 2022, which are even higher in that. I'm looking back solely at 2021 numbers. I think to go any lower and not utilize the potential funding and budget for the potential funding is there. We need to do that, but we also need to proceed with some caution. I've also taken a somewhat conservative approach to estimating casino revenues for 2023, anticipating an additional $625,000 over the 2022 budgeted amount. Our final revenues in 2021 for casino fees came in at 2.1 million. So it's very high, but we know this is a somewhat unstable source of revenue for the county, and experience in other areas have shown that casinos as a revenue source tend to start out strong but decline over time. So again, a rather conservative approach here. And I wanted to talk about the use of fund balance. So last year, 1.6 million in fund balance was used to balance our 2022 budget. And this has the impact of starting off the following year's budget with a hole to fill. So in 2023, we started off the budget forecasting process without that $1.6 million of ongoing
Sorry,
revenue.
can you go back to your slide?
Oh, sorry, I must have bumped it. Thanks. We started off the budget process without that 1.6 million of ongoing revenue in our budget, which is equivalent to a 3% levy increase. So this estimation assumes that we're starting off that no fund balance will be used in 2023 to balance the budget. So that is a 1.6 million cost to fill in 2023 budget. Some other drivers and local revenues that were included in our budgeting include the county clerk's revenues, many of which are generated through fees on real estate transactions, and the real estate market continues to be very strong in the county. So we're anticipating some increases there, about $200,000 worth. And also included in other drivers are payments in lieu of taxes, rents, court facilities aid, the sum of which all total to an anticipated increase in revenues overall for 2023 of about $178,000. Also included here are our known obligations for 2023. We have respective lease agreements for Workforce Development Board and Workforce New York. We have contractual agreements in place, an increase for Ithaca area economic development, and also clothing allowance, which is in our labor settlement with the sheriff. So this amounts to about $58,000 in known contractual obligations for 2023. So to recap and to tally all of these items together, we see that to maintain our current level of effort, it entails approximately a $353,000 increase in the tax levy, which is equivalent to a 0.67 tax levy increase. So that is to maintain the current level of effort in 2023 as we have in 2022. This is a listing of departments and services that are mandated and or required by state or federal law versus the departments and services which are not mandated but asked for by the community, important services, but are considered discretionary. Just as a, sure can. Okay. We'll be seeing these figures again too. Okay. So now we're looking at some areas identified as priorities that the maintenance of effort budget does not cover. So we're still in the process of building back departmental cuts that were put in place in 2021. These include the restoration of organization-wide training funds in the Human Resources Department. That totals about $60,000. As we've seen in-person trainings and conferences starting back up, we anticipate there'll be more of a need for funding in this area, and $60,000 would represent full restoration of the cuts that were experienced back in 2021. Another $265,000 would be needed to fully restore the COPS programs contracts that were cut from funding in the DSS budget. The COPS program stands for Community Options Preventive Services. They provide supports to families to keep the number and the duration of youth placements in detention and foster care relatively low. And this funding supports contracts with community agencies such as the Child Development Council to provide family support services, to Cooperative Extension to provide parenting, education classes, to the Advocacy Center to provide preventive youth services, and Tompkins Community Action to provide primary school family support. So this funding would make those contracts whole again and part of the DSS target budget where they were previously. And another $46,000 approximately would fully restore the vehicle lines in the DSS budget, which were cut. And while we've moved as an organization to a centralized green fleet procurement for vehicles through the capital program, we have maintained vehicle lines in a few departments such as DSS so that we can draw down state funding to help pay for those vehicle purchases. And I've also approximated another $75,000 in highway vehicle fuel, which would be about a 30% increase in fuel costs for a very fuel dependent department. Another area that the beyond maintenance of effort would cover, that the maintenance of effort budget does not cover, and that is an increase for our sponsored agencies. So in the 2022 budget, the county largely restored our sponsored agencies' target funding to pre-pandemic levels. The list of agencies that the county sponsors is up here on the right. And there's, I'll be showing you a chart on the next slide, which shows the funding of these agencies, the funding history since 2020 and the restoration. The maintenance of effort doesn't cover growth for these sponsored agencies. A 3% increase amounts to approximately $200,000. The county is or will soon be negotiating the transportation services agreement with TCAT over the next few months, along with the other underwriters, the city and the county, or the city and Cornell. TCAT still has many unknowns in their 2023 budget. They're not certain whether the state transportation operating assistance or STOA funds are going to be based on ridership, or if they'll be held harmless because there's been a reduction in ridership. TCAT is also going to be entering union negotiations, and they're going to be renewing their MOU with Cornell. So there are still some unknowns there. I factored in a 3% increase in the underwriter share as a placeholder. That would be about $30,000. And then finally, the county's funding for TC3. Our base aid, so TC3, our community college, Tompkins Cortland Community College, we share the costs between Tompkins County and Cortland County, and our base aid shifts as the percentage of full-time equivalents shift between the two counties. So based on their calculations, our sponsor share will be decreasing slightly in 2023 by about $50,000. However, Tompkins County is supporting TC3 in 2 other major initiatives over the coming years, including their workforce development initiatives. And we are supporting them with 3-year one-time funding. We're supporting 63% of that program, as well as their capital program with one-time funding, and also at 63%. So unfortunately, I've learned in the New York State budget for TC3 established a funding floor for community colleges, which is unfortunately based on this year's enrollment, which enrollment right now is at an all-time low. So this is not good for our community college, and something that we'll want to follow up with where we can with advocacy, because using this calculation and basing it on this year's enrollments is really hurts TC3 in terms of funding. So again, this is our listing of sponsored agencies and their target funding over the last few years. The 2020 budgeted figures were what we budgeted prior to COVID hitting, and by and large, we have restored funding back to where it was prior to the pandemic. There are a few exceptions where programming or other circumstances have changed in the meantime, which affects funding amounts, but on the whole, our funding of our agencies is restored. And again, a cautionary note that the maintenance of effort budget does not cover any anticipated need to balance the airport budget in 2023 with some combination of airport fund balance and general fund balance. Again, this is looking at a worst case scenario, but until there's greater recovery industry-wide and our employments increase, this is the type of risk that we're looking at. But I also want to point out that if this infusion of funds are necessary, it would be temporary in nature. It would come out of fund balance, and I'm not suggesting a levy increase for this purpose. So to recap, to fund the items that I just mentioned that would be beyond the maintenance of effort, and including the restoration of the department, the previous departmental cuts, planning ahead for highway fuel, and increasing our sponsored agencies by 3%, it would take another $632,000 or an additional 1.21% levy growth. And then putting that all together, the maintenance of effort budget amounting to the 0.67% levy increase, and the beyond maintenance of effort would make for a total 1.88% levy increase. You can see to the side the history of the recent financial targets that have come out of previous budget retreats with the legislature, notably for the 2022 budget. Well, for the 2021 budget, we had to enact a 12% decrease. And then for the 2022 budget, we started with a target of 1.89. And between then and the budget conversations and budget adoption, the various actions actually increased our target to 2.73 as we found the need to bring back staff mid-year after having sustained such deep cuts the previous year. So, so you can see where the suggested 1.88% increase would fit along that continuum. And here's the final table showing the impact of various target levels. Got from our assessment department, the median home value in 2022, it looks to be $226,000. And you can see that the maintenance of effort budget would increase the levy by 0.67%, would have a $64 impact on a homeowner of a median valued home. The beyond maintenance of effort budget would increase the levy by 1.88% and would have an $80 impact on homeowners. And then looking at the estimated tax cap of 3.49% would have a $100 impact on homeowners. And that is the end of my presentation. So at this point, I'm happy to answer questions or go back in the presentation to any slide if there were questions there. Or I could stop sharing. Whatever's most helpful. Yes.
Can I remind legislators to please use your mics too when you're speaking?
Okay, I can't see hands in the chambers. And I can only see them on the number of Zoom screens that I can see while Lisa's computer is sharing. So I see that Dan has his hand up. So I guess we'll start with him.
Thank you. Gosh, first of all, excellent budget presentation, Lisa. Thank you so much. There's so much in there. I only have one question though. You talked about a projected wage level rise of approximately $5 million in 2023. Did that take into account the potential salary increases from the wage study?
No, it only takes into account the contractual amounts and the amounts that we have settled and the compounding amounts that have come out of the recent negotiations. So, and the expected increases if and when we settle with corrections, but it does not take into account a compensation study, but any increase as a result of that.
Would it be worthwhile? I guess this is a question for everybody and don't have to answer it right now, but would it be worthwhile to have a dollar figure in mind that we could use as a placeholder as we do budgeting? If it's our intention to implement the results of the wage study in 2023, we need to think about that. So like I said, not an answer required at this time, but just a thought. Thank you.
Okay, Amanda.
Thanks. Yeah, Lisa, that was all very informative and lovely. Thank you. What's my question? My question is, you just said all of this, but so the maintenance of effort, the difference between the maintenance of effort that you have here and beyond maintenance of effort is that beyond includes the agencies and that sort of those extra things. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Agencies, the restoration in previous cuts to our own departments, those that I mentioned, human resources, DSS, and the potential increase with TCAT and potential increase in vehicle fuel.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now I cannot see what's going on in chambers. So Lisa, I'm going to ask that you call on people who may have their hands up in chambers, please.
Sure. I saw Mike Lane and then Randy.
Dan started asking about the $5 million increase in the wage figure. And I'm missing something in the calculation in my head. That would be over a 10% increase over the 45 million or 4 point from 45 to 50. And we know our contracts don't go up that much a year. I don't understand why that amount would increase that much this year.
I think it has to do with the compounding of the sheriff's salaries, which were out of contract from 2017 to present day. So they have,
Okay, I knew there was a factor I wasn't keeping in mind
Yeah.
here. Okay.
and then it also includes the assumption that we have certain parameters that we're going to apply for corrections as well. And they have been out of contract since 2018.
That makes sense.
And Lisa, I would assume that that figure also includes the several management and professional employees that we added over the course of last year.
Well, it includes also the negotiated increases for white collar, and then management and confidential follow white collar.
Right.
Yes.
And
So-
I just wanted to remind everyone that we had to hire several people in admin and HR and finance and, across the board in departments, and they were relatively highly compensated employees. So they're included in that number as well, I would assume.
Yep, everyone that was listed on the payroll roster. So we have 760 some odd employees. Mhm.
Thank you.
Sure. I think I saw Randy Brown next.
Thank you. Very good presentation. Helped me a lot. In looking at, I think it was slide 25, you went over the ARPA funds we received, and I think it was 25, 24, maybe 26,
Which funds?
23.
There it is.
There it is.
Yep.
Okay, so of the 19.8 million, about 15 million went toward capital. Was that to pay down loans, or is that for other projects, or both?
It could only be applied, it couldn't be applied to existing debt. So any new project that we were going to undertake in our capital program, and it had to meet certain parameters. So it couldn't be any project that was being funded in combination with federal dollars. So we have a list of projects. I could share with you what they are, but there are some in the highway, facilities, I believe recycling, materials management.
In maybe this is a different account, but there's 6.5 million that we're going to be giving out in grants. And so is this a different fund? Because if you,
Yes.
this is a different ARPA fund.
No, it's this, the Community Recovery Fund, which is what we're calling it for the time being, Randy, comes out of fund balance. And that was an agreement that the legislature reached in conjunction with its decision to use 100% of the ARPA funding for government operations. And the 14.9 million that you see on this slide was part of that money, but it was earmarked as cash for capital. So, going forward, we have a very ambitious capital plan, like $40 million or more, I believe.
120.
I'm sorry?
120.
Oh, yeah, I knew it was ambitious. Thanks, Lisa. So in any event, if we can use cash for a substantial portion of that, that saves us debt service going forward for many years, which is why we adopted this course of action. This was all stuff that happened last year.
Okay, I think I understand that now. The other question I had, and actually both Mike and Dan, I think you answered that on a 12% increase in salaries, confused me a little bit. But looking at the budget, the big unknown is sales tax revenue, right? So, and that's really what's going to offset all the increases that you're doing. So, all right, so I guess we better keep an eye on that. Okay.
Annie.
Thank you, Lisa, to you and everybody else who helped contribute to this. This is really helpful information, and the presentation made it really digestible. So a couple of questions. The wage study timeline, can you give us an update on that?
So my understanding is Ruby and the HR department, they've selected the vendor and I believe we'll be proceeding with a contract and that work will be commencing here this spring. I don't know how quickly it's going to take place. And not knowing the outcome of what it's going to tell us and the fact that we will be in contract with all of our bargaining units. I think we are going to have to come up with a plan as to how to make any adjustments that come out of that study.
Are we hoping to have the information, say, by August or September? Do we have any ideas when we're?
Annie,
Uh-huh.
the resolution to retain the contractor or the consultant will be coming before BCP in May, as far as I know from what Ruby's told me. I suspect that by the time we get all the information and figure out what our strategy is going to be to implement the recommendations and work through the issues with our bargaining units, this will begin to impact our budget next year.
I guess my question is, will we have, if we're looking at the wage study affecting the salaries for 2023, are we going to have that information,
By September or October?
Yeah, just to help.
I would hope so.
So we're hoping that, okay. And then I think it would be helpful for at least for me to get like the fund balances as maybe when you send this out as part of that information. So we have that. And then a quick thing, if you go to back to your 22, I guess it's one more, I think you're on 23 now. So at our, one of the updates we had maybe a month ago from tourism was that they might not, let's see, that they might not need to use the infusion for 2022. We don't know yet, but right now, and it's early in the year, but the figures are looking at, so that's just something midway through the year, later in the summer, we'll know more about. And just overall, my thoughts are, seems like we're gonna know so much more later, the summer, early fall, that it's gonna, for me, it's kind of hard to figure these things out because it's just gonna be such a, with just so many unknowns to kind of track if things are on the upswing or downswing in various things. But thank you for being conservative in some of these numbers. It's helpful. Thank you.
In terms of the fund balance, I would have loved to shared the status of the various funds and their balances. We don't have that information yet from the finance department. I think Rick is expecting maybe by June.
Okay, thank you.
Mike Lane.
I wanted to talk about TC3 a little bit. As we know, the sponsors, the two county sponsored shares are behind the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, have been for years, that we should be supporting our community college with. We also have to remember that TC3's fiscal year is different from ours, and we're going to have to make a decision on their budget fairly soon. Normally by now in the past, at least pre-pandemic, we always had gotten together with Cortland and had a presentation on their budget and an ask of what they were looking for. It seems to me this year, both counties might be in a little better shape to perhaps give an increase to the TC3 operating budget. And I would like to see us think about that. And I'd like to see us begin talking about that sooner rather than later, because They're going to be in front of us in what, June, I guess, asking us to approve their budget. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lisa, I see Shauna's hand up.
Okay, and then after Shauna, I see Lee's hand up here.
Thank you. Thanks again, Lisa and staff, for providing us with a pretty wonderful overview of what's going on. I have some really big concerns with our airport and the financial concerns that we're seeing as far as the deficit. Unfortunately, only a handful of people in our county are able to afford to fly out of our airport. And I think in the future, I would have a real problem using tax dollars to bail out the airport. And I was wondering if there are any services that we might be able to cut back on in the future, so that we're not constantly supporting the airport with our taxpayer dollars.
You're asking about services at the airport that we might be able to look at and to cut. I know that there are contracts that are out for bid right now where they're trying to look in some of those areas, but we can certainly be looking at others with airport leadership.
I know that something that was extremely controversial years ago, whenever the airport was being built, was the customs facility. And I know that it has not been as successful as we wanted it to be. And it's losing quite a bit of money. And I don't know if this is something that maybe facilities can take up. But I want to be as transparent as we can be about that loss of revenue and where it's coming from. Because it might be a hard conversation that we need to have about maybe cutting or limiting some of those services.
Thanks, Shauna. This is in part why I wanted to bring the situation to light, so that you as legislators and through your committees can start talking about ways that we can proactively address some of these issues. So thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see, I had Lee next and then Mike Lane.
Two topics. Well, Shauna kind of beat me to the punch on the airport. I had a question related there. A few days ago, Senator Schumer was making the rounds announcing relief funds to airports throughout the state. And so that leaves me with two questions. Are there some outside funds coming in that will offset these deficits potentially? And the second is, when we look at the $19.8 million that Tompkins County saw, is my understanding that there are a lot of relief dollars that have come into a number of agencies that we help fund and departments and so on in other forms. So it might be interesting to see what that total amount is in relief that has come to the county beyond just that $19.8 million that we've seen. But back to the question, does the airport have some potential of some dollars that aren't reflected here?
So thanks, Lee. It's a good question. My conversation with Roxanne, the three funding sources that I mentioned, the CARES, CARISA, and ARPA that went designated directly to the airport, they've been utilized over the last couple of years, and those are ending in 2022. There's another funding source that was the bipartisan infrastructure bill or bipartisan infrastructure law, which they have available to them, but that's to fund new projects. So that's to take on new capital projects, but it's not to address any current operating deficits or going to existing debt. That's my understanding.
Okay, well, thank you for clarifying that, because that takes one thing off the table. The other thing is you showed a slide earlier on in the program about the FTEs in the county and the trend from, I think, 2012 up through 2022.
Oops.
And I'm just looking for a little historical context on that. It looks as though there was a drop to a level from 14 to 18. You can see it. 13 to 14 dropped. You kind of stayed steady. And you saw it move up in 19 and 20. And then, of course, the drop in 21. And you know, we're working our way back up. But what accounted for that move from in the number of FTEs going up from 2018 to 2020? Was there a need to create new positions in many departments? I mean, that was a fairly good increase, and why would we be looking to go back to that level?
Yeah, I would need to take a longer, harder look at the data, and I don't have an answer for you off the top of my head.
I don't think we were hurting in those years where it was lower. I'm just wondering what drove that jump after kind of being stable for some time. And is there some flexibility and a need to go back up? You've outlined some departments where they need some help. I understand it. So that's my only comment. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. Mike Wayne, your hand was up previously.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to talk about the airport after hearing Shauna's comments. I think it's a red herring to say that air travel is for rich people. Unless you think all the students that fly in and out of here are all wealthy. I think it's important that we have a first-class airport, regional airport, because it puts us on the map. It puts Cornell on the map. It puts Ithaca College on the map. It helps our economy. We don't have a 4-lane highway connection to the interstate. We don't have a train service. Bus service is not terrific. They don't even have a bus station in the city of Ithaca. We have an airport that got punched in the gut with just like all the other airports across the country through the pandemic. We have business travelers that need our airport, and we've been very, very lucky over the years. We're one of the few municipalities that have an airport that don't put taxpayer money into it directly. Whether that would be asked of us, I don't know. We hope not. But I think we should be proud of our airport and proud of its global connection and being an attraction with our university, particularly to bring people down here from across the world.
See Randy Brown and then Annie in chambers.
Thank you again. I had a similar question that Lee, a very good question on employee count in the roster. Is the more employees you have, the higher your employee cost goes. So I'm always concerned about that. Any operational efficiencies are important. Also, as far as the library, or I'm sorry, the airport, as a person who flew 40 times a year and another 12 people that did the same, we flew out of Ithaca 5-10% of the time. And we actually walked to the airport, so we don't have to pay for parking either. But we'd fly out of everywhere but Ithaca because it was so difficult to get where we wanted to go. There were no direct flights. Back when they used to fly direct to Pittsburgh, it was a great connect for us having for our business, but then they ended Pittsburgh and that was the end of that. So I'm not big on putting extra funds into the library. I'm sorry, the library again. I like the library. Into the airport. It's important to the community. But to Shauna's point, many people that are marginalized do not fly. So that's my comment on that.
Annie Corman in Chambers.
Thanks, Lisa. I just want to say regarding the airport that I don't fly a lot. Maybe at most once or twice a year, but I have in the past few years been able to sometimes fly out of Ithaca. Tomorrow morning, I'm taking some family members down to Elmira to go out on one of the lower cost direct flights down to Florida. And Roxanne Noble at our last couple of F&I meetings has talked about they are being very aggressive in trying to get a low cost carrier here with direct flights. If Elmira, and I am very hopeful if Elmira can do it, I think that we can do it, and that'll be really helpful for everyone. Well, or at least not, still it doesn't mean everybody can afford to fly even at those prices, but sometimes you can get less than $200 to go down to Florida, sometimes even less than that. So it'll at least be more affordable for more people anyway.
Thanks, Annie. I see Deborah has her hand up, and then Greg in Chambers raised his hand.
Yeah, I just want to caution everybody against eating up, huge chunks of time in this meeting talking about our airport. We're talking about a $500,000 hit potentially in the context of a $200 million budget. So let's try to keep this discussion at this point crisp, because we really need to get to the main event here, which is setting a target so that Lisa and her team can move forward with working on a proposed budget with our department heads.
Greg Mezzi.
Yeah, I agree with what Deb said, so I'll keep this crisp. I think we have great mechanisms, and I think we have good committees and advisory boards that can evaluate the airport and the operations of the airport. And I think it would be best served if we had those conversations in that committee and come back here. Obviously, the airport's struggling, air travel is struggling, certain aspects of tourism is struggling, right? So that's going to take some time. And I think it would be a great disservice to our community to just all of a sudden have a knee-jerk reaction because one aspect of our budget needed a little bit more support than another. If there's aspects of the airport or air services that aren't working, I would suggest F&I or the Air Services Board, look at, to Shauna's point, the customs facility and those type of things, and come back with a proposal on how to save some money or how to take, mitigative actions, those type of things. So I think we should move on from the airport, but I don't think we should, sort of throw the airport away because there's a downturn in air travel, right? I think it's an incredible asset to our community to have a connected community for businesses, for our residents, for our higher education institutions. So it would be a real shame to do anything too much too soon without having the appropriate channels really evaluate what's best for the airport and ultimately what's best for the county.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Lisa, is there anybody else with a hand up in the chambers?
I'm not seeing anyone.
Okay, so I want to reiterate everyone's thanks to Lisa. This was an excellent, comprehensive, thoughtful presentation. Annie mentioned that it's hard to know where we really are. We don't even know what our fund balance is, and we have to make estimates about a lot of things that are somewhat unpredictable, and especially now given our geopolitical and economic situation. But this is how we do things in Tompkins County. We have a budget retreat at the end of April, and we set a target. And we understand that we're doing that fully cognizant of the fact that things may change by the fall, and often do. So I don't know that we necessarily need to have a formal motion or resolution. My understanding from my discussions with Lisa and Kathy earlier today is that that resolution will come. We will be having a special BCP meeting just before our next legislature meeting on May 3rd, at which we will formalize whatever the target recommendation is that we reach tonight. And we will also have the standard, we can go over the tax cap if we need to resolution. So I guess I want to take everyone's temperature as to how they would feel about setting the target at 1.88%, which would be the minimal beyond maintenance of effort target. And I see a hand already, Amanda.
That was exactly what I was gonna say. I would go for 1.88%, which according to Lisa's chart here, that feels like a pretty big jump for a homeowner, but I also feel very strongly that we need to support all of our agencies and outside organizations that we support, because that's what we do here in Tompkins County. We believe in giving people who live here services. So that would be my vote. Also knowing that, you know, we're going to have lots and lots of OTRs in the fall. We're going to have our community recovery fund. In the meantime, and as you said, lot is going to change. But anyway, I'll stop.
Yeah, I just want to say that an $80 tax increase is 22 cents a day. Just to put it in perspective. Does anybody else have any comments?
In chambers, we have Mike Lane and Veronica Pillar.
Okay, I have Dan, so then we'll do Mike Lane and Veronica after Dan.
So I guess I just want to bring up the same point that if it's our intention to implement a wage increase based on the study in 2023, I'm just confused how we're thinking about those two things simultaneously. And I'm wondering, you know, maybe a solution is to pick a slightly higher number as a target, maybe 2.5% or something like that. I don't know. I know I said before that we don't have to answer this now, but I realize we do have to answer this now. So
I would be in favor of a somewhat higher percentage if there's consensus for that. You know, again, we're operating with what we know now, and we don't know what that salary study is going to tell us. I would direct everyone's attention to the fact that for Cortland County, that number was pretty high. It was close to 10% from what I read. But we need to remember that we have just finalized contracts with all our bargaining units that were actually very generous. And probably if we ended up at the same salary levels, we've already gotten at least halfway there. It's just very hard to predict, Dan. You know, I will defer to the consensus of my colleagues in terms of whether they want to do the bare maintenance of effort target, fully understanding, as always, that our targets change, or whether you want to incorporate something larger. I guess if your main concern is the compensation study and how we'll afford to implement it, that's not a factor that, as I understand the process, Lisa's going to have to be hammering out with our department heads over the summer to get to her recommended budget. This target number is just to evaluate beyond maintenance of effort as it applies to each department as she puts together her county administrator's budget. So the compensation study could easily be thrown in later. Does that make sense?
I think so. Lisa, does that sound right to you too?
Yeah, it's hard to budget for an unknown figure. So yeah, I do agree that we could. And also, I think to Deborah's point, after having passed these collective bargaining agreements and negotiated salary increases, it will be interesting to see where we fall out with a compensation study in regard to that. So anything that we do, we will have to, anything that we implement, we'll have to do in conjunction with our union partners in the collective bargaining agreements. So that part does make it tricky. And at the same time, the wages and being competitive in the market is really important. And so, yeah, I think that we're going to have to find a way to plan for implementation when we have some numbers that we can work with.
Okay.
So in chambers, I saw Mike, Veronica, and then did I see you, Lee? Okay.
I felt a little bit like Dan. I was going to suggest we do 2%, 1.88. You got to go back to your department heads and say, you can raise your budget by 1.88%, or we're raising the 1.88%. I think we should go to 2%. It's not that big a difference. As far as the trying to figure out what the compensation study is going to do, you know, we know we have some problems with some of the higher salaries attracting folks here, some of the financials and financial employees and other people, but we may not be as far out of line with some of the other salaries. We're the competition for some of the counties around us. Cortland, for example, just raised their starting salary for their deputies by 33 1/3% because they were losing them to Tompkins County. So until we get the compensation study and get an idea of what it's about, we don't know how it's going to be. And as I think Lisa just said, we may have to figure out a strategy to implement it. Maybe you don't just do it all at once. Maybe you work it in over a period of time.
As Cortland County is doing, as I understand it, Mike, they're phasing it in, aren't they?
I think so.
Yeah.
Veronica?
I was just going to say basically the same point as Dan and Mike, that of all the unknowns, this is one that seems like at least we know like probably a positive increase is coming. So I would support, you know, bumping up to 2% or 2.2% or something like that.
I think Lee and then Greg.
Try to keep this crisp. And I appreciate what Deborah's leading into this with the, you know, the variables that we're going to be dealing with over the next few months. And, you know, this is the beginning of a 6-month process. And as it's said, the 6 months is a lifetime in politics, and 6 months will be a lifetime in the development of this budget. So setting a goal is why we're here. But I got kind of a tough philosophical feeling on this, is that, you know, when you're showing record sales taxes and we're looking at fund balances that we are, and the county takes in $19.8 million in federal funds for relief, we're looking to spend $6.8 million on a community relief fund, knowing that there's some organizations that have been hurt. It sounds good, but, you know, talking on the street today, when somebody tells me that childcare has become cost prohibitive, they're about crying when they're buying their kids' milk at $5 a gallon, and we're putting $4 plus in our gas tank every day, And my latest fuel oil bill on a property where I have no choice but to use it is $5.05 a gallon. And people are waving their new assessments at me. You got to be a little sensitive about this. And I appreciate 22 cents a day. But when you compound that with what the schools may be looking at and the village may be looking at and the city may be looking at, the town may be looking at, and put this all together, people are hurting still in areas of this county. And the farmers are telling me it's tough to go out with a tractor every day and have to put the fuel in it at the prices they're going. So, you know, I'm okay with setting a goal at this point of 1.88 or 2.0 and seeing how this rolls out. But I would find it almost unconscionable coming off this couple rough years that we've had and people in the straits that they've been in to be even thinking about a tax increase when we've had the infusion of revenues and relief dollars that we've had. I'm not saying I vote no, but it's going to be a tough sell for me because I see the people out in my district and they're a long ways from recovery at this point. I'm glad other areas are coming back good. Thank you.
Greg?
Yeah, I definitely agree with, many of the things that Lee said. And I think I just want to ask a clarifying question because we can set the 2%, but how we pay for that is still a question at hand, right? It doesn't necessarily mean we could take that 2% like we did last year and take that out of fund balance so that there effectively was no increase to the levy. Am I correct? That's what happened last year?
That's what happened last year, but in effect, we're paying for it this year.
Sure. Yeah, and we have also seen record sales tax. We've seen occupancy tax. We've seen assessments go, right? I mean, there's ways to pay for that. So I guess I'm more on the cautious side that I'm not just quick to pass the buck to the taxpayer in a tax increase or levy increase. So I think we need to be really creative on how we look at this. We really need to get some answers around where our fund balance is and if there's opportunity to do that, to provide some more relief. So, I'm not opposed to setting an increase now so we can move the discussion forward. But I do want to challenge the process on if there's opportunities that we can cover that through other things or other revenue or other funding sources.
That's a discussion for later in the process, Greg, at which point we will have more information.
I see Randy's hand.
I'm fine with the 1.88 you proposed.
And Ann?
Just to keep it moving along, if we're taking the temperature of the room, I'm also fine with the 1.88%.
Veronica?
Thank you. I can't resist biting on the philosophy that Lee brought up, which is part of the point of the government running is to support people, right? And provide some of the things that they need. So it's, it wouldn't be a bad thing to collect more money from people if that is like coming back and turning into supports and resources for folks' lives that help them. That's a very broad question about something with a lot of details and not, I think, answerable right now. Obviously, that's what we're trying to do, but that's maybe what I will keep in mind as I study the details of the budget. And that's the kind of question I think ties back to like Shauna's having brought up the airport, which I appreciate.
It's back to you, Deborah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, what I've heard so far from several people now is either 1.88 or 2.0%, which I want to remind everybody is a difference of $1 a year on a median priced home. So I guess maybe we should just see who's in favor of which amount and be done with it. I mean, try to remember, everybody, this is a planning tool for Lisa and our department heads. That's all we're providing at this point. You know, these other issues that everybody has about where the general economy is going to be in the fall and what the amount of the compensation study may be and whether we're going to add to the levy or take more out of fund balance, that's all stuff that we're going to have to decide 6 months from now. It's premature at this point. We're just here to give Lisa a planning tool. I am not in a position, being here remotely, to really count votes. So I don't know how you want to do this. Lisa and Kathy, you're in a better position to count. Do you want to give people the either 1.88 or 2% option?
You want to just do like a roll call?
Sure, and then people can just say what percent they favor. And then, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Thank you, Amanda. Ms. Gio.
Okay, I'm going to start at the top of the list. Shauna Black.
So just, sorry, there's always one, I'm sorry. So just for clarification, are we voting on, we're saying which one we vote for, the 1.88 or the 2?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
But this isn't a vote. This is just a preference.
Straw poll,
It's
correct.
not a formal meeting.
Right.
I'd like to vote on the 2, please.
Travis Brooks,
1.88.
Randy Brown,
1.88.
Amanda Champion,
1.88.
Deborah Dawson,
2.
Henry Grandison is not here this evening, and Rich John is not here. Dan Klein,
2.
Ann Corman,
1.88.
Mike Lane,
2.
Greg Mezzi,
1.88.
Veronica Pillar, 2. Lee Shirtliff,
1.88.
and I don't believe Mike Sigler is with us. So we have 6 that have support the 1.88 and 5 that support the 2%.
May I suggest 1 point? What would be, what would be the half? 1.9?
1.94,
1.94.
1.93, maybe if we average it all.
Here's a better idea. Is there anyone in the 2.0 group that simply cannot live with 1.88?
No,
I
don't care.
Okay,
Yeah, that's fine.
let's just go with the 1.88 because again, folks, this is a tool. And you're right, Mike Lane, it might be easier for Lisa and the department heads to talk in nice round 2.0 figures, but 1.88 is where everybody, the majority of the people here seem to feel comfortable. So let's go with that. And here's what will happen. I will this will be a resolution that will come to BCP on May 3rd and to the ledge later that day. You know, if there's some remarkable and stunning development now and then, the resolution may change, but right now the resolution is going to say 1.88, okay? All right,
Had his hand up.
I'm sorry?
We had a hand here in chambers.
Okay.
Sorry, Deb, it's me again. I hear what you were saying about all the other things being premature. And I think a little bit to Veronica's point on, you know, we need to be providing services and things like that. if we knew some of those other factors at this point, I may have gotten behind a 5%, right? If I knew that it necessarily wasn't going to get passed on and I knew that there was something meaningful that we could do. So I just think that's important just to remember that, yes, it does come at a later date, but I may be able to get behind supporting another $3 million in spending if we knew where we could get that money from, right? And if it definitely didn't have a direct impact on taxpayers. And if it did, it was because of a very worthy endeavor, right? So I think that this is something as a new legislator to this process, is a little bit of a struggle for me because, it's chicken or the egg, right? It's, asking to pass this based on the good work that Lisa and her team have done. But there's also things that, I don't know. I just sort of wanted to make that case and say that I think a lot of us, and I don't want to speak for anybody, but my sense is that people would be willing to do more if there was a way that we knew how we could, pay for that and that kind of thing. So I understand it's premature, but I just wanted to sort of air my personal struggle.
If I could respond. So in terms of an ongoing source of funding that you're looking for, I think if I'm hearing you correctly, if there are alternative sources of funding that would not impact the tax levy, there aren't that we know of that are ongoing. So having the information about the fund balance would let us know what sources we have that are would be one-time in nature. And if we put ongoing expenses, if we pay for ongoing expenses with a one-time funding, it moves the obligation up a year. So if we hadn't done that last year, we could be looking at a 3% less than where we're starting from this year. So, and each year, there's no guarantee that in the following year, the sales tax revenues will be sufficient to cover what we've pushed ahead a year. So I just wanted to make sure, but it looks like you understand that. So we're on the same page.
I appreciate, okay. I think the clarity is important. So I appreciate the follow-up.
Just to clarify something, what I hear you saying is if you knew there was some other source of funding, you'd be willing to consider a higher levy increase. If there was another source of funding, you wouldn't need to increase the levy because that other source of funding would pay for whatever it is that we would be doing.
Yeah, I'm just using the gross dollar figure. If we're looking at it as it relates to the levy, but I hear what you're saying.
Okay. We only need to raise the levy as much as we need to raise it to pay for everything that other revenue sources don't pay for.
Veronica, you had your hand up, but
yeah, I guess I'll say I wanted to ask that clarifying question, what Deborah just said, because it kind of sounded from what a couple of people saying that we were interpreting these percent increases numbers as a % increase in our operating budget, but that's not what this is, right? The budget is actually increasing by quite a bit more than this percentage.
Yes.
So when we say we're increasing the tax levy, or potentially increasing the tax levy by 1.88%, that's not really directly related at all to say the percent increase in a particular department's budget, right?
That's correct.
Okay,
yes.
Good. That's what I thought.
Because we got money, we got federal and state reimbursement. We get fees from the clerk's office. We have casino revenue. We have STPB, which doesn't really factor into this part of the budget. We have sales tax, and the levy is only one of those sources. So all we're talking about in this particular conversation at this particular point in our meeting is how much do we want to target our levy increase. Now, if we add to our budget by approving over target requests in October and November, then we'll have to increase the levy to pay for those over target requests. But as I said, it's premature to think about that now.
I want to thank everyone. I think we've been given the direction we need and really great questions. And I'm happy to follow up on any further questions that people may have. But thank you for the conversation and for the direction to move forward.
And thank you, Lisa, for your first budget report as county administrator. Done good.
Yeah, congratulations.
And all of her hard work.
Okay, I think we're done, folks. This is just the beginning of the process. We'll see you all again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Aye. Thank you.